lecture here again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to downplay the great speaker part because I have a flu today that I'm dealing with a little bit, but I will do my best. I want to thank August and for inviting me, and he suggested that I do a two-part lecture. It doesn't mean 2 hours. It means 2 parts within an hour, actually 40 minutes or so. And the first part is going to tell you how to fight ID successfully based on my experience at Iowa State University. The second part is going to explain why it is that intelligent design is not science, it's religion. So let me start here with how to fight ID and win. In my experience, it began when Dr. Guillermo Gonzalez is his name, a proponent of intelligent design, arrived on our campus at Iowa State University in 2001. Now, unbeknownst to us at that point, he was trying to execute what's called the Wedge strategy. The Wedge strategy goes back to a document called the Wedge Document. It's a master plan for intelligent design that at first was hidden. Its existence was denied for a while, but then after people began to inquire about it, the Discovery Institute, which is one of the main think tanks for intelligent design in the nation, acknowledged its existence, and now it's on its own website. But in this master plan, it divides up their objectives by the number of years. So they have 20-year objectives, and they have 5-year objectives. One of the objectives for their 5-year was to have 2 universities where design theory becomes the dominant view. Well, Dr. Guillermo Gonzalez was part of that plan, to have at least 2 universities. They had tried it at Baylor University, and they did not succeed there. It's a Christian university, and they themselves said, we don't want anything to do with intelligent design. And now they were attempting to infiltrate Iowa State University in the same way. Now, Dr. Gonzalez, in 2004, published a book called The Privileged Planet with a theologian named Dr. J. Richards. So it's already telling you that this is not pure science. This is co-written with a theologian. And at first, my university, like many universities, didn't understand what intelligent design was. So they sort of were glad that he had published a book. Of course, they hadn't read it. I did read it, and I am a former creationist, so I know all about creationism because I used to preach it. And as soon as I read it, I saw this is creationism. It's just intelligent design is a new word for creationism. So in October of 2004, we invited Dr. Gonzalez. I invited him to debate the issue in front of experts. Iowa State is full of scientists, based on an equal time. He refused. Now that becomes an issue later because they then accused Iowa State of silencing intelligent design proponents, when in fact it was the opposite. We would invite them to present their ideas, and they constantly refused. Now by June of 2005, his book, The Privileged Planet, had become a video, and it was exhibited at the Smithsonian Institution, one of our national treasures in terms of science. And we found out the Discovery Institute had paid to exhibit this. The Smithsonian backed off of that as soon as people began to complain that they were actually dealing with a creationist video. And pretty soon they had to give back the money, but they allowed the video to be played. But it became a big brouhaha and embarrassment for the Smithsonian Institution. Needless to say, now we were involved because Iowa State, he was a professor at Iowa State. Now, by the summer of 2005, we learned that the name of Iowa State was being used to validate intelligent design in textbook hearings in Texas. So what would happen is people that wanted to introduce intelligent design to the curriculum would go down to Texas and say, look, intelligent design is science because up at Iowa State we have a professor named Guillermo Gonzalez who's doing innovative research in intelligent design, and nobody seems to mind. It seems to be accepted as science, so it must be science, you should put it in your curricula. At the same time, George Bush, in August, had publicly declared his support for teaching intelligent design as an alternative theory to evolution. So we knew that if we stayed silent at Iowa State, they were going to use our silence against us. They were going to continue to say, it's science because at Iowa State, it seems to be accepted, it's great research, it's innovative and so forth, it's a new thing. So we said, well, as long as we don't say anything, yeah, that's what they're going to be able to say. So I and two colleagues, they're actually Dr. Jim Colbert, Dr. Michael Clubb, both scientists, and I helped draft a statement against intelligent design. And we basically outlined our ideas as to why intelligent design was not science, and why most scientists, 99.99% of all scientists, agreed with us. So eventually 130 or so faculty members signed the statement. And then the media blitz began. Within a day or so of us publishing the statement in the local media, we had Channel 13, which is one of the main broadcasters in central Iowa, the Des Moines Register, the biggest newspaper in Iowa, the Wall Street Journal eventually came calling, the Chronicle of Higher Education. It became a nationwide story within the first 48 hours of our release. And the success came almost overnight. Because it obliterated overnight the perception that ID was being accepted at Iowa State University. Iowa State University went from a place where ID research was taking place to one of the most hostile places towards ID in the nation. And you can see it in this cartoon here. This is an incident, of course, never happened because intelligent design people make up incidents. But here is the president of Iowa State University giving me a call, which never would happen anyway. We're trying to burn Dr. Gonzalez in effigy, according to them. Well, soon other universities joined our statement. They thought it was a great statement, and they used it as a model at the University of Northern Iowa, then at the University of Iowa. So a total of 400 faculty members eventually signed. It became one of the largest faculty expressions against intelligent design in the nation. And then there was the separate issue of tenure for Dr. Gonzalez. It turns out in 2007, Dr. Gonzalez came out for tenure, and he was denied tenure at Iowa State University. He took it and appealed it at every level that was possible. And finally, in 2008, he ran out of appeals. The Board of Regents of the state of Iowa denied it. He's no longer at Iowa State. But although they try to blame our statement as the reason he did not get tenure, the fact is our statement never mentioned Dr. Gonzalez. The fact is our statement was meant to be a statement against intelligent design, not against his tenure. Nonetheless, they try to connect both. And there were many other issues that explain why he did not get tenure. One of them was that he had $22,000 in outside grants before he got tenure, whereas the normal average is $1.3 million. And money and science has to go together a lot of times. If you don't get enough money, you don't get telescope time and so forth. So really, there were many other issues against him. Meanwhile, I encountered this on May 22nd, 2007, from the Discovery Institute website. Somebody told me, hey, you know that you're on the Discovery Institute website? And I go, no, I didn't. So I looked up, and there was Iowa State promotes atheist professor who equates Bible with Mein Kampf. They threw the Holocaust in there just for good measure, while denying tenure to ID astronomy. Well, the case was like this. At the same time that Dr. Gonzalez went up for tenure, I went up for promotion on the very same year. Those cases were completely unrelated. It turns out they promoted this atheist, and they denied tenure to this intelligent design advocate. So the Discovery Institute immediately put us together as an example of how Iowa State was promoting atheists and denying good scientists, who happen to hold Christian views, to deny them tenure. More fun came with Bill Dembski, who is probably the most prominent intelligent design advocate in the nation, and his website called Uncommon Dissent. He began the rumor that I had falsified my publishing record. Well, I proved the rumor false within 24 hours And he eventually retracted his accusation. Not only did he retract the accusation, he offered to give me tenure. He said, I would have voted for you for tenure. And so says, you certainly seem worthy of tenure, and I expect I would have voted for your tenure if I had been on the appropriate committees. So I will come back to how it's very important to fight blogosphere smears very quickly, otherwise they can spread. No, Gonzalez was made a martyr. They accused Iowa State University of suppressing academic freedom, of silencing intelligent design advocates. They claimed minority status. They deserved a hearing because since they were a minority, intelligent design advocates were a minority in university, they should be treated sort of like African Americans and others with civil rights issues. And the suggestion was that science should be decided by popular vote. Since most Americans apparently believe in creationism, it would be wrong not to teach creationism in schools. So that was the idea. And here, this is supposed to be myself, the president of ISU, Richard Dawkins, ISU here, and of course Darwin up at the top. So those cartoons are circulating on the web. Then, of course, this battle was memorialized on film. How many of you have heard or seen Expelled? Well, Expelled, I can go into that, how deceiving the filmmakers were. But, so yes, they made a film about this whole controversy called Expelled. And it so happens that both Dr. Gonzalez and I were at the same movie premiere at the same time. So on that day, which is April 18th, we both kind of walked like the OK Corral, he's coming this way, I'm going the other way. And we ended up sitting in the same theater, and he's sitting right here, and I'm sitting like over here. And when the question and answer period came up, he's standing up in front of the crowd because it was really a pro-intelligent design crowd, and I'm sitting like right there. He never mentioned my name. Never said anything. He knew, I would stand up and probably contradict him. Then they got talk radio on my case. This is Jan Michelson, the Rush Limbaugh of Iowa. And he's constantly on the air over there saying, oh, they have this atheist stuff at Iowa State, and look at what they did with this brilliant Dr. Gonzalez, and yet they have the atheist stuff at Iowa State. And Dr. Gonzalez's research is not being acknowledged, but they have this atheist up at Iowa State, and he mentioned the word atheist with my name every chance he could, Fighting back successfully meant that you organize the faculty immediately. You try to get as many faculty on your side and to respond with a statement of some sort. That worked very well. I was a relative novice at the time about how to fight blogosphere in the blog world. And I learned that responding quickly is a key. And of course, you have a little bit of help from my friends. People I actually didn't know until they came to my defense. People like P.Z. Myers of Feringuli and Panda's Thumb, and other Christian bloggers would come out to defend my position, especially this think of trying to link me with the Bible's worse than Mein Kampf idea. And so this is what the Discovery Institute, this pro-intelligent design think tank, did wrong in my estimation. First of all, they underestimated the faculty response. They did not think the faculty would rise up the way we did. They thought, in fact, it was very naive to say that within 5 years they were going to have a whole university where intelligent design was the dominant view. There's no more naive view than that if you know how faculty work. You can't make faculty do much of anything if they don't want to. And especially if you think you're going to dominate a whole university with this kind of odd viewpoint, it was very, very naive. They did not see that it was going to be a biblical scholar instead of a scientist that was going to lead the battle. They thought, if anyone is going to oppose us, it's going to be these Darwinist scientists, right? not a biblical scholar. A biblical scholar would be for intelligent design, wouldn't he? No, not this one. And so, yes, it was the fact that I had been a creationist. I knew their arguments well, whereas a lot of the scientists didn't really know what intelligent design was until you had to explain it to them. And they, of course, also overestimated the power of politicians and talk show hosts to influence ISU internal affairs. This is not the case at every university, unfortunately. The whole system of politics is trying to rein in the universities. They're trying to attack academic freedom. They are trying to tell us what is science and what is not, instead of us saying what is science and what is not. So there's a great movement out there where legislatures, governors, all sorts of politicians want to get involved in the university and then determine what should be called science or not. And so that is one of the great dangers. You face this in Minnesota too, because I think you have a governor that's pro-intelligent design. And you have Michelle Bachmann, whose name I need not repeat again. And but all of these present dangers to good science. And so how do they play it now? Well, if you look at this website, which has this program called Salvo 5. Salvo 5, it says, deals with the privileged planet astronomer Guillermo Gonzalez, who discovered at Iowa State University that when atheism goes head-to-head with science in a politically correct environment, atheism wins hands down. So notice how they're constructing their dichotomy. Science is on one side, atheism is on the other side. And in fact, if you're not for intelligent design, you must be an atheist. That's how they played it a lot. Well, the facts say otherwise, because I'll explain to you now why intelligent design is religion and not science. Let's start with the fact that intelligent design is basically nothing more than the teleological argument, so-called. In layman's terms, is the design argument. And it goes something like this. Design implies a designer. That designer is the Christian God. So if you see something that's designed in nature that looks like it's designed, well, then there must have been a designer. And if there is a designer, it must be the Christian God. And that's the basic design argument. Now, what the modern intelligent design movement tries to sell is that this is new, that somehow we have new data, that somehow the concept is new, when in fact it's at least 2,000 years old, when in fact it has been given a hearing for 2,000 years and rejected for the same reasons. Whereas the intelligent design advocates would want to say, it hasn't been given a chance in academia. It hasn't been given a hearing in academia. That is just a blatant lie. We've heard it for 2,000 years. And here's a case from the 1st century BCE. Cicero, the great Roman rhetorician, in his book called De Natura, on the nature of the gods, says this: but if all parts of the universe are so constituted that nothing could be better for use or beauty, let us consider whether this is the effect of chance, or whether in such a state they could possibly cohere, except by the guidance of intelligence and divine providence. Well, there's intelligent design right there. Things can't possibly be here by chance. They had to be here by providence, by some sort of design, intelligent will. And it's in Cicero that we already have the famous watchmaker argument that we found in William Paley in 1805. Cicero says, when you see a sundial or a water clock, you infer that they are shown by art, not by chance. How then can you suppose that the universe, which contains both works of art and the artist, can be void of reason and understanding? Here again, if you see a clock, a water clock, you see that it's designed, obviously. how can you not see the same thing in the universe? And of course, intelligent design can also be viewed as an effort to express what is found in Isaiah 45:18. For thus says the Lord who created the heavens, he is God, who formed the earth and made it. He established it. He did not create it a chaos. He formed it to be inhabited. One of the prime arguments of intelligent design is the earth was specifically made for life. And so they're really just using a fancy version of a biblical belief. And here is the design argument of A.A. Strong, a famous Baptist theologian. You found it in 1907. It's nothing new, again. And he expressed it this way. Order and useful collocation pervading a system respectively imply intelligence and purpose as the cause of that order and collocation. Since order and useful collocation pervade the universe, there must be an intelligence adequate to the production of this order, and a will adequate to direct this collocation to useful ends. That's an intelligent design argument. It's not new. So here we have now this modern version of intelligent design as outlined in this book called The Privileged Planet by Dr. Guillermo Gonzales, and again, he co-wrote it with a theologian named J. Richards. And they said, look, we can scientifically prove to you, or at least give you evidence, scientific evidence, that the world or the universe is designed by an intelligent being. And he says, design can be inferred scientifically when an entity possesses two valuable properties that are independent of each other. And habitability would be one, he said, and measurability, the ability to measure the universe, the ability to do astronomy, is the second. You can have a habitable planet without having a planet that is useful for astronomy. Therefore, they're independent. So they go on. This habitability and measurability, since they are independent features, if you find them together, they are so improbable that you find them together. That's what makes the argument for design. Indeed, if the Earth were too close to the sun, well, it'd be too hot for life. Too far from the sun, it'd be too cold for life. If the axis of rotation were different, you couldn't have life. If the weather patterns on Earth were too hostile to life, you couldn't have life. The fact that you have all of these components together means that it can't just be chance. They must have been designed for life. And the fact that not only do you have habitability on the planet, but the fact that you can do astronomy on this planet makes it like winning the lottery, they said. It's not possible that you have these two very independent features, again, because you could have life without having life that observes the universe. You could just end up with just a bunch of toads. The fact that you have both is what makes it reasonable to infer that this planet was designed for life who could observe the universe. So the designer's goal, according to them, is some designer, they don't want to call it God, but God designed our planet so he can generate astronomers who can then discover his purposes. All these concepts, as I told you, were used 2,000 years ago. Cicero already talked about how Earth is unique, how it was designed for habitability. And the data, all the data, Cicero was talking about how the temperature was right, how the axial rotation was right. He had already talked about that. There's nothing new here. There's no new data. Really, there isn't. And let me just make one comment before I go on to tell you the specific flaws of this argument. My critique is valid even if I did not rule out the supernatural. Even if I were a Christian, I could still prove to you that intelligent design is a flawed scientific idea. Because they often will make this dichotomy, you're either for intelligent design or you're an atheist. But the fact is, many Christian scientists would say intelligent design is still a bad idea. For example, you can still believe in God and believe there are bad arguments for God's existence. If I said, I believe in God because August Berkshire's car is blue, which I don't know if it is or not, Christians would say, I believe in God, but it's not because August Berkshire's car is blue. I believe in God, but there are bad arguments for God's existence. So it's even worse. Yeah. Now you're into polytheism and creating different colors. But yes, so supernaturalism, believing in the supernatural, has nothing to do with why intelligent design is bad. Being a Christian or not has nothing to do with why intelligent design is bad. And this is what I'll show you. Let's look at flaw 1. Intelligent design doesn't seem to realize that the planet is filled with millions of features that you could say the same thing about. So given that potentially millions of features we can identify on our planet that were designed, how did the authors of the Privileged Planet, TPP, determine that these two features, habitability and measurability, were the ones for which the planet is designed? After all, there are many other things that would not exist if the Earth were not positioned where it is. If the Earth didn't have this axis of rotation, if the temperature went right. All these things would not exist. HIV viruses would not exist. Blindness in human beings would not exist. Genocide would not exist. Hog confinements would not exist. Paris Hilton would not exist. Heavy metals would not exist. Heavy metal would not exist. And Paris Hilton and heavy metal together on one planet, what are the chances of that? See? Now, when they tried to explain, well, why is it that we pick these two features and not the 10 million others you could have mentioned, they have an out. On page 303 of the Privileged Planet, they said, when considering universes everybody recognizes, unless they're trying to avoid a conclusion they find distasteful, that a habitable universe containing intelligent observers has an intrinsic value that an uninhabitable one lacks. In other words, we chose these two features because they have intrinsic value. HIV viruses, Paris Hilton, does not have intrinsic value. Some would disagree, including myself, but this is flaw 2. See, intrinsic value is undefined. What is that? Well, they tell you themselves. Such a value is difficult to define, but we usually know it when we see it. That's what you call science? It's like gravity is difficult to define, but we know it when we feel it? No. See, the Privileged Planet is not measuring an objective feature. Intrinsic design, we don't know what that is. How did you choose these two components? Because it seems right. See? It's not an objective feature. It's not something like gravity where you can measure it. Electricity or anything like that. In fact, it's a circular argument. Because all they're saying is, well, why did you pick the ability to do astronomy as the reason that this planet is? It ends up being a circular argument. I think astronomy is valuable to me, therefore it's valuable to a designer. And X is valuable to me because it's valuable to a designer, see? I'm able to do astronomy. And try that with Joe the plumber, who's not really a plumber, right? A plumber could say that. Everything seems to be just right for me to do plumbing. Therefore, the designer meant for, me to do plumbing. It's a circular argument. Measurability and habitability must have been designed because they are valuable to me. There's no reason you pick those features other than you like them. You could have just picked HIV viruses. And of course, this goes back to Cicero again. He thought jewelry was the thing for which our planet was designed. He says, we collect from the caves of the earth the iron which we need for filling the land. For tilling the land, we discover the deeply hidden veins of copper, silver, and gold, which serve us both for use and for adornment. See, the gods put all of these metals here. Why? Because They value jewelry. See? And look, how can you deny it? I mean, jewelry wouldn't exist if our planet were too far from the sun, if our planet were too close to the sun, if the axis of rotation were different. See? So jewelry must have been the reason. And here is law number 3. They have an arbitrary causal sequence. Their causal sequence goes like this. A designer meant for this planet to be habitable, so it could then generate human beings who could then make scientific discoveries. And that's what the rationale was. Now, you can conceive of other causal sequences just as well. But why couldn't it be that a designer designed a planet so it could have life, which could then generate human beings, which could then make computers to replace the human beings? Why can't that be the causal sequence? Or why can't it be more like this? You know, a god put dinosaurs on Earth so he could kill them off, so they would give rise to mammals, who then would give rise to humans, who then would give rise to another species. We're just an intermediate. Now, why can't it be that way? Well, they can't tell you because they can't read God's mind if there is one. And flaw number 4 is they have a humongous unexplained time gap. If the Earth were made to do astronomy, well, gosh, you know, even Dr. Gonzalez says that this planet's been here 4.5 billion years. Now, if 4.5 billion years ago, there were no astronomers. 4 billion years ago, there were no astronomers. 3.5 billion years ago, there were no astronomers. At 3 billion, no. 2.5, no. 2 at 1.5, 1.0 at 0.5, no. No one doing any sort of astronomy on this planet. So if our planet were designed for measurability, to do astronomy, why is it only in the last 0.00002% of the planet's history that there were any creatures who took scientific measurements? And why did a creator make an Earth that, you know, was left with no measuring creatures for 99.99999% of its history, if this is what he wanted to do? How do you explain that? In fact, you can make the opposing conclusion. You could just say, you know, the designer meant for Earth to have no measuring creatures for most of its history. That was the purpose. Or you could say measurability, the ability to do astronomy, is actually an anomaly. Just like HIV viruses, they say, are an anomaly. They weren't designed. All bad things, of course, weren't designed according to intelligent designers. Flaw number 5 has to do with theological evasions, because when you mention, look, if there were a designer, how come he put nipples on men? Ever thought about that? Why is that? Or why is it that you have blindness and all kinds of congenital deformities? Why? Well, their answer is that's a problem left to the theologians. That relates to the problem of evil, which the theologians handle. We don't handle it. We're scientists, see? Well, where else have you seen in science where counterexamples or results that don't accord with a theory are relegated to the problem of evil? I mean, where in a lab class you ever took, did you say, you know, my experiment's not working out, that's the problem of evil? You know, this calculation I'm making here, it doesn't quite equate with the laws of gravitation that I learned. It's a problem of evil. Nowhere in science do you do that. Only in intelligent design do you do that. Flaw number 6, it's not falsifiable, despite their protests that it is. They say, well, if you find another habitable planet, that would falsify our hypothesis. And therefore, since it's falsifiable, it's science. But that's not true. You see, that would only falsify the hypothesis that we are the only inhabited planet, not that our planet is designed for habitation. So finding a second inhabited planet still does not falsify the thesis that ours was purpose for habitation and discovery. How do we falsify the hypothesis that there can be more than 2 planets purpose for discovery? How do we falsify that? Well, you can't. And flaw number 7 is they use arbitrary statistics. This is more what is called fine-tuning. The privileged plan says on page 301, when we say the laws of physics appear fine-tuned, what we're saying is that in contrast to the many other possible universes in its universe neighborhood, ours has just the laws that make it habitable. And then they go through all the things that have to be right for life to exist. Look, if the charge of the proton were different, you couldn't have life. If Planck's constant were different, you couldn't have life. If the mass of the proton were different, you couldn't have life. If the gravitational constant were different, you couldn't have life. In fact, if you add up all the things that you need for life, it comes to like 10 to the 90th. You know, the probability of life. That cannot be chance. That has to be then life is designed. But see, it's the same problem we saw before. The assumption is that the number of physical laws and entities that must exist or be right to produce an entity is proportional to the amount of purpose. In other words, the more things have to go right, the more you can assume that it's purposed. The problem is what we saw with the axis of rotation and the Earth being too far or too close to the sun. Proponents arbitrarily choose one of millions of features that also would not be possible or probable if the laws of physics were other than what they are. You wouldn't have HIV viruses for the same reason. You wouldn't have blindness for the same reason. You wouldn't have congenital deformities if the mass of the proton or the charge of the proton were different too. See? So you can say that about anything. In fact, you can show that thousands of entities otherwise regarded as without intrinsic value required as many or more laws to exist or to produce them. You can reduce this whole argument to absurdity, in fact. Because if the amount of purpose or design is proportional to the amount of physical laws that must exist or be right for an entity to exist, then we can show that human-made computers are even more purposed than human beings. And let's simplify this mathematically. Let's call P everything you need to make human beings. Just call that P, okay? The mass of the proton, the charge of the proton, gravitational constant, Planck's constant. Everything you need to produce human beings, reduce it to P. Only P would be needed to produce human beings, but computers would require P plus 1. You have to have one more thing to produce computers. So by that logic, the more things you need, the more purpose you can assume it is. Computers are more purpose than human beings. You need more things to produce computers than you need to produce human beings. So you could say there is even more reason to think that computers were the ultimate purpose of the designer. And then when you ask, why is it that this author assumed that doing astronomy was the reason why the planet was designed? You have to guess, is it that you're an astronomer? Well, yeah, he's an astronomer. In fact, this theory ends up being very narcissistic. My work is so important, astronomy is so important, that God designed the entire planet just for me, just so that I can put my telescope. Oh, forget all these children dying in Africa. Forget all the burnt victims in the hospital. No, the planet's designed so that I could do my work with a telescope. Very ethically suspicious theory. And here's another thing they love to throw at you. Irreducible complexity. See, we have now proven that the universe or things are designed by an intelligence because they are irreducibly complex. This is a bunch of gobbledygook. Let's start with their definition of irreducibly complex. Michael Behe, who is the proponent, the most famous proponent of this concept, defines it like this. By irreducibly complex, I mean a single system composed of several well-matched interacting parts that contribute to the basic function, wherein the removal of any one of the parts causes the system to effectively cease functioning. And of course, we have this flagellum as the example. It is too complex to have evolved by random mutation. See, if you remove any one of the parts of this flagellum that's supposed to be like a motor, it's not going to function as a motor. Therefore, it must have been created together. Otherwise, how would it work? The fact is, you can say that about anything. Everything is irreducibly complex once you prejudge a function. Take a water molecule. It's very simple. It has 2 hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom. If you remove any one of those atoms, it no longer functions as a water molecule. Now, you have to say God had to create water molecules in their entirety, because they wouldn't function as a water molecule if they're just created one at a time, or just atoms singly. They never tell you, well, HIV viruses are also irreducibly complex. HIV viruses will not function as HIV viruses if certain components are removed. No, they don't want to deal with that. There's a lot of bad things that can be irreducibly complex. No, they call that, that belongs to theologians, the problem of evil again. And then they'll throw at you the mousetrap, or they might throw at you Mount Rushmore. Look, mousetraps are composed of physical chemical materials that do not arrange themselves in the shape without human intervention. That's why you can't use the mousetrap as an example. Otherwise, they'll tell you, look at the mousetrap. If you remove any component, it won't function as a mousetrap. Therefore, you have to infer that someone made it. But no, why? You see, the materials that compose a mousetrap don't arrange themselves that way without human intervention. That does not mean there are not other materials that can arrange themselves without human intervention. Take an ice crystal. Take a salt crystal. They have very exquisite arrangements without human intervention. Just because, a pile of rocks can't do photosynthesis doesn't mean that there's not another chemical that can. And they love to throw at you this kind of example, but they seem to ignore the physical chemical composition of what they're talking about. So, finally we get to, is it science or theology, even by their own reckoning? And this is William Dembski again. Page 252 of his book, Intelligent Design. He says, intelligent design is a strictly scientific theory, devoid of religious commitments. Apparently, he does not read his own book, because on page 206 he says, if we take seriously the word-flesh Christology of Chalcedon, the doctrine where they decided, the church fathers, that Christ is fully human and fully divine, and view Christ as the telos, the goal, toward which God is drawing the whole of creation, any view of the sciences that leaves Christ out of the picture must be seen as fundamentally deficient. Now, wait a minute, I thought you told us that intelligent design was devoid of religious commitments. And did he read his own book? Because on page 209 he says this, so too Christology tells us that the conceptual soundness of a scientific theory cannot be maintained apart from Christ. Well, how is this devoid of religious commitments if you cannot maintain a theory apart from being a Christian? You see? They contradict themselves on that very issue. And of course we have Hindu versions of intelligent design. But here are the final lessons. The privileged planet in intelligent design uses correct measurements and facts to reach unscientific conclusions. It's like this. Let's suppose I measure this room and I have the length right and the height right and the width right. Perfectly measured. The data are sound. But then I say that means, therefore, that President Bush designed this room, which from the looks of it, may be so. Now, do you see that I can use perfectly good data to make bad conclusions? Well, yes. It's the same thing with intelligent design. The problem with intelligent design is not the data they use. The problem is with the structure of the argument. And so, with that, I leave it to you to ask me any questions that you want. Or, yes, sir.
Well, what seems unusual about this case, the Gonzalez case, is that the ID person was an astronomer rather than a biologist. I know that all biologists rise up as one whenever there's a discussion of ID, because ID requires saying that just about everything in biology is wrong. Whereas
I might use it.
That in astronomy, it would be would also evoke such a strong reaction, because the astronomer doesn't have to deny the results of the science, does it?
Well, a lot of people may not realize that intelligent design can permeate any field. One of the problems was explained to one of the faculty members at my university, who was the president of the faculty senate. She said, well, intelligent design doesn't matter so much because it doesn't affect, like animal science. Well, yes, it does. Because you can make an argument for intelligent design about anything. In fact, you should see intelligent design more as a social policy. Because once they get to the point where you agree that God has intelligently designed this planet for certain purposes, the next thing is God has designed this planet for certain social structures are designed by God. Homosexuality is not the design of God. Only heterosexuality is. Monogamous marriage is the design of God. Any other family arrangement is not designed by God. So really, the science is only the prolegomena to the social policy that they want to bring to our planet. See? Any other questions? Yes?
Okay, it seems like intelligent designers will often kind of bring along younger creationists too. You'll have younger creationists defending intelligent design, and yet the intelligent designers don't seem to go that far, like 5,000 years. Did you get any experience into how those things are put together?
Well, it's political, of course. If you have some sort of shared goal, you can forget the other parts that you don't share. So yeah, a lot of young Earth creationists don't like the intelligent designers because they're mostly old Earth creationists. But they say, well, as long as they have this concept that at least we're designed, we're willing to help them sometimes. Not all of them, but a lot of them will for that reason. And so yeah, but even intelligent design within the community, they fight each other a lot. If you look at the Dover trial and its aftermath, you see that they started suing each other or threatening to sue each other because they didn't think they weren't successful in Dover, of course. And so now they started to blame each other for the lack of success. Sort of the same thing happened in Iowa and Iowa State. Who is responsible for the success of the anti-intelligent design movement? And they start saying, well, we the voters are, or the voters are, because they put people in the legislature and so forth. Yes, sir.
In the public school,
Yep.
when evolution is taught, should there be any acknowledgement of intelligent design?
Yes, as how not to do science. You can do it as an example of bad science. You can go through what I just did and explain why it's not science.
And are there others than intelligent design that should be similarly acknowledged? Creationism?
Yes, if you want to make them an example of why it is that they're not held to be scientific, I think you can do it that way. Otherwise, I think it really belongs in classes about philosophy or in religious studies as part of the history of the religious ideas of creation. But it certainly doesn't belong as a scientific theory. It's not a scientific theory. So as long as you don't present it as a scientific theory, you can discuss it just like we discussed spontaneous generation at one time. All those kinds of unscientific theories become examples of what science really is. And by the way, in my background, it's not that I'm just a biblical scholar. My training, I have a degree in anthropology, which is a home of the study of human evolution. So I am familiar with genetics and all of that too.
The flagellum that is
Yep.
mentioned as being irreducibly complex, then the Roman Catholic Ken Miller, who maybe
Yes.
I saw
Mm-hmm.
you cited once, argues that further research through maybe the use of the electron microscope shows that the propulsion system within the flagellum is such that it seems to have been incorporated within the flagellum. And
Oh, yeah.
It isn't irreducibly
Right,
complex.
right. That
It
there's
goes through evolution.
Right. That's
Ken
right.
Miller goes all the way with
Yes.
evolution. Although then he jumps and says, well, maybe as a Roman Catholic, he wants to say, well, God created the Big Bang. But then I think, and see if you agree with me on this, that if you have a theory of a multiverse, a multi-universe, then perhaps, or maybe within the Big Bang, but a multiverse of many universes that we call a universe, historically, Big Bang, small bangs, medium bangs, and then you would see the odds of getting something just like we have in this solar system would be conducive to life.
Yes. Well, let me tell you the problem with the idea that, if you didn't have God, it would be too random to get what you have. The fact is, God won't change that. Because God could have created an infinite number of possible universes. So the fact that you get this one is just as random as anything else that could be produced without God. See, it would be just as random to get this one, even if you had a God in your system. So I don't see that God does anything to ameliorate randomness in the universe. Not at all. Yes.
You have this question, but this is from a friend of mine. She equates what you call evil, that somebody sinned or the family sinned in the past. That's why we have disease, homosexuality, et cetera, But I come back and I said, but God created all of us in His likeness. How can you say a thing like that? And she has, we'll come back. Still this evil thing.
Yeah.
Adam and Eve stuff.
Well, yeah, there are many ways to deal with that issue, and one is to make them define what they deem to be absolutely evil. And once they define what they deem to be absolutely evil, then take them to the passage in the Bible where it would be contradicted. If someone says, something absolutely evil would be killing children, take them over to Numbers 31:17, where God commands children to be killed, or women and children to be killed. Take them to 1 Samuel 15:1 and on, where God commands children to be killed. So what is evil? Make them define evil, and then you can see that the Bible will probably contradict everything they ever thought was evil. Yes.
It seems like with Sarah Palin and other things that instead of science, we're looking at psychology in the depths of what people need, which fly in the face of all scientific reason. And that people don't need or want anything of critical thinking. They have a psychological need which trumps everything else.
Yeah, that's true. My wife and I were talking about that just on the way over here, about how there is seems to be this growing anti-intellectualism in America that now relishes being unlearned. They relish not being educated, as though now that's a virtue and not a flaw. And so that's very worrisome, because if we've already had 8 years of someone that was very intellectually uncurious, and look at what we have now. And so yes, I think Miss Sarah Palin is just another case where she relishes apparently not being as educated as someone else. That is a problem.
And through history, and I'm not a historian, but it seems like in so many churches and so much religion, because of the inequities and so much of the lack of science for disease, there's so much suffering which propagated the emotional aspects. And we can look forward to that again today as the economy is going down into another slump and more hardship. People find a way from reason because they're searching for comfort.
All great politicians, if you read the history of great politicians, knew that emotions were more powerful than reason sometimes. If they could sway masses through emotional appeals, that often was more effective than any reasoned argument, which has so many nuances, so much complexity. You're not going to follow it. necessarily. Most of us don't. I don't understand the whole economic crisis. I don't understand those derivatives. And that's the problem. A lot of us cannot understand certain things, and government is way too big for the average person to understand all the issues. That's part of the problem too. Let me see who that's not. Yeah.
I'm wondering how old Dr. Gonzalez would say the planet Earth is.
Oh, he's an old Earth. He would say 4.5 billion years. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, an argument for the human life being so important would be if you go back to the biblical age of the Earth.
Yeah.
I thought maybe he went by
No, he's an old Earth creationist, which is why I pointed out that his argument doesn't make much sense if he thought the Earth was 4.5 billion years old. Why weren't there no measuring creatures for most of that history? See? So it actually undermines his argument to be an old Earth creationist. Someone who has not asked a question? Okay, yep.
Your arguments used in the privileged planet and a lot of these physics and astronomy type arguments, some people also call the anthropic principle.
Yeah, that's right.
Some of those
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
overlap. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
part of intelligence, but just so
Yeah.
hear that.
Yeah, that's right.
Clarify, was Gonzalez fired from Iowa State or just denied tenure? Because I heard
If you do not get tenure, you're effectively fired. So the procedure is like this. You go up for tenure. If you're denied, you're given one more year to basically find another job. So he was denied tenure in 2007. He was given to 2008 to find another job. He has found another job at a place called Grove City College in Pennsylvania, and which is a Christian university, explicitly a Christian university. So let me see who you have not asked a question, right? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Coming back to what you said before about the difficulty of making a reasoned argument and the emotions that were mentioned as far as religious belief and political persuasion. The work that you've done in academia, in North Dover and at Iowa State is most definitely respectful and admirable. But ultimately, it's winning the battle and possibly losing the war, because of being an anthropologist yourself. There was a long article in the New York Times a while back about the teachers in the aftermath of Dover, even though it's been ruled in courts that intelligent design is not considered science, it's not be taught in a scientific context. Teachers, at the street level, if you will, are encountering a great deal of difficulty, and sometimes will even avoid bringing up the topic in the classroom because of what they encounter. Now that comes to a greater social issue.
Right.
We can win the day in court and in academia, but you fail to persuade. And that's kind of raising a bigger question. I guess I would ask you, what are your thoughts as far as what would make it a principle or people who are
Yes, the idea that now science teachers are reluctant to talk openly about the flaws of intelligent design because of the legal problems they might get into. That's part of your issue, right? Yeah, that is a difficult problem. I mean, how do you change a whole culture? But I am an optimist in many ways. Let me tell you why. I think that information can change minds. And the reason is this. Well, I can give you at least two reasons. One is I used to be a fundamentalist. As fundamentalists can get. As creationists can get. And what changed me was information. Seeing the other side. So I have a lot of kids. I teach Bible at Iowa State University. Yes, I'm a Bible scholar who teaches Bible, and I'm an atheist at the same time. And one of the things I see in my students is they don't even know that there are other viewpoints. They don't even have that information. Nor has anyone explained to them why the other viewpoints think the way they do and what their objections would be to their viewpoint. When they hear all that information, a lot of them move. They shift. So evidence number one is my own experience. I shifted from one to the other based on information. Evidence number two is my own students. After teaching hundreds and hundreds of students, I've seen what information does. I see what exposing them to different viewpoints does. So it's just that there has to be more of us. And the other thing I would say is scientists have to work more closely with biblical scholars, because often it's scientists who don't know how to address creationists, fundamentalists in class. They don't have the Bible training to do that. And so one of the things we did at Iowa State was to hold joint classes between myself and the two scientists I mentioned. We offered a class on intelligent design, so you would have the person trained in theology, myself, and Bible, together with the scientists. And well, together we can do much more in terms of explaining to students why it is that this is not science and it's religion. But a lot of the reluctance comes because we haven't trained our scientists well enough. You know, there's a lot in science that they have to learn. I mean, why would they add this? But that's one of the issues, that scientists are still not working closely enough with biblical scholars, critical secular biblical scholars like myself, to educate. Yes. Let me see, someone that had one more?
The website,
One quick statement. Sorry, there was someone in front of you. P.G. Myers gave me a good idea, because ID is thought for in terms of academic freedom.
Yeah.
Academic standards is important. So that's a quick reply.
Yeah. To me, academic freedom includes the freedom to say that something is not science. So, you know, they only want it to go one way. They want the freedom to say that something that's not science is science. But academic freedom includes the criticism of unscientific ideas.
the website,
The website where you can find this talk, this lecture that I just gave a version of it, is called Talk Reason. Talk Reason, just Google Talk Reason, Hector Avalos, and you'll find it.
It'll also be on our website after we get this edited
Yep.
out. So.
But there you have it in written form. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.